Hey boys, this time last year I shaved my head bald.
Oh yeah, he told me he was gonna shave his head, and I knew that he hadn't taken his picture for the school yet. But I purposely didn't tell him.
Yeah, I know, and I really liked you for that. You're like, do you remember we need to do our yearbook photos? And I just finished.
That's good prank. I disabled. So what that menu's called when you right click is a context menu.
Yeah.
I disabled that, and it worked, but I could still use the context menu.
So the episode is about eternity, and this is a good example of
A feedback loop
eternity,
of
just
eternity.
non-stop.
Yeah.
Talk about computers with Josh. Eternity. There and then.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, just
Do you want to just get
informal.
into it? And if you touch the stand, I'm gonna kill you.
If you touch the stand, you're going
You
to kill
touch
me
the stand, I'm gonna kill you in a violent manner.
in a violent manner. All right, bring it. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Accessory to Thought. Today we have another guest. We have a man called Caleb Logan, good friend of ours. Caleb, why don't we just start by you introducing yourself and telling us a bit about yourself?
Well, hello, I'm Caleb, and well, first of all, I suppose it's how I know you two guys. So, I went to primary school with Josh.
Yeah, we go way back.
I have many memories, probably embarrassing stories as well.
Yeah.
I remember particularly one, but I'll not mention that one on the
No,
trip.
mention it now.
I remember sitting in P7 on our trip to York, and Josh, along with, well, to be fair, this is embarrassing for me too, singing around the table every morning something. I cannot quite remember the lyrics. Something
But
about,
something to do with cows.
yes,
Yeah.
I can't remember much, but
Neither can I.
I'm glad we got by that stage of immaturity. But
Good story.
and then I know Ben mostly through my girlfriend Alyssa, who went to school with Ben, and I then got to know him. And since we've had lots of deep conversations about faith and all this type of stuff that we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, we're also filthy right wingers. But anyway, yeah. So podcast episode today, I thought is just about eternity. Throughout the podcast, me and Josh have had these extravagant ideas about the Bible, the different things in it, what different things mean, the differences between looking at things more on a spiritual level compared to a materialist level. But there's one topic that keeps popping up, and that is the whole idea of eternity. Now, what is eternity?
That is the deep question.
The
isn't
deep question for today.
Well, when you asked me to come on and talk about this, to be quite honest, where do you even start? And that was one of the things that I found hardest, was where do I actually begin? Because quite honestly, we can't get eternity. Like, everything in our life is finite. That was the thing that kind of stood out to me most when I first started looking at this. And just before we kind of delve into it, there's just a verse that I think I should read prior to everything we say here, and it's from Isaiah 55, and it's 8-9. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So when I read that, we can talk all we want today, and this is really important conversation, really meaningful conversation. Unfortunately, we'll never fully understand the depths of eternity until we reach heaven with the Lord. And I think that verse really encapsulates the idea that we can talk about it, and we can get lots from the Bible about this. We'll never fully understand until the day we meet Christ.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic verse to open up in. It really sort of sums up the idea that, you get a lot of people who hate the idea of eternity, especially non-believers, because when you mention eternity to them, they automatically think hell, because they're not Christians, and they're like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. That's just evil and horrible and mean. And here we are having a God saying, you don't know, you don't understand my ways, you don't understand what I'm doing, but it's for humanity's sake, the best benefit of us all. So just going back to, if you could just briefly sum up about what was the definition of eternity, what does it mean?
Well, eternity effectively is the infinite end, I suppose. So we have life, which is finite, and to Christians, and actually, as I was doing a bit of research, every mainstream religion, apart from the belief or religion of agnostics and atheists, all believe in some form of eternity or afterlife. So effectively, eternity is where we go after death, where we spend our soul, so to speak, spends its
the rest of time.
the rest of time.
Can I just jump in there? So you say we go to this thing that is eternity, which would be either heaven or hell. Would that be what you're saying?
Yeah.
But if my definition of eternity would be something that has no borders, doesn't have a limit. So would we not? We would be in eternity right now, because you would agree with that, obviously. But you also said we are finite, okay?
Yeah.
On the earth or whatnot, but we have experience of the infinite in our very consciousness.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that your experience didn't really have a start and it didn't really have an end. It's just sort of you're always in the present.
Yeah.
You'll never be in the future, and you never were in the past. You're always in the present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that.
So in that sense, and also you also describe something that doesn't have any boundaries. It's not multiple things, because multiple things have boundaries of each other, right? Two countries have borders, right?
Yeah.
But if there's just one country on the planet, it wouldn't have borders. It would be the planet, right?
Yeah, as a whole.
So eternity would be described as one thing as well.
It's like all encompassing, all encapsulating of everything.
All of reality is inside it, because if it's beyond borders, if it's all one thing, then the things with borders must lie inside of it. Nothing can escape it.
So if God is eternal, I mean he's limitless without borders, okay, and heaven and hell are limitless and without borders are eternal.
Yeah.
They would have to be the same thing, or else they would have borders.
I understand where you're coming from. That is a good point.
What do you make of that?
This is where it gets completely out of any human understanding, I think, in a sense, because though, like what you're saying, I like humanly is completely correct. And it's one of the things I struggle with most. Me and Ben were having a conversation the other night about how we kind of both had points in our lives where we wanted to, not attack God, but you're really, really deeply questioning the possibility of a God, the possibility of a heaven, of a hell. And the one conclusion that I came to was, I don't understand how God can separate heaven and hell. I don't understand how God can be God but be in man, like fully God, fully man. And humanly speaking, that's impossible, because if a God, like the term God means to be like all powerful, almighty, all seeing, but then you put yourself in, like you were saying in that you were talking about the character of God with Nathaniel there, about putting God in a box. That is effectively, in a human perspective, God put himself in a box of skin. And it's impossible then to understand and reconcile that Jesus Christ was fully God as well as being inside man. And I think in the same sense, what we humanly perceive as a limitless, infinite, God is completely outside of our thought. Like, we can try all we want, and I think you see that in the Bible, that people always try to understand the mind of God, and the truth is, he is too powerful, too mighty to understand.
No, just what you said. I mean, the whole reason, obviously we can go into the reason of Jesus, he's our savior, and we understand that, but I think also in a more like study sort of level, like Jesus and it is the character of God, so it allows us to have a relationship with God. You can just think about in the Old Testament how God was this force, this thing that moved nations, made them rise and fall, and then in the New Testament, it's a man who has personal relationships, who has thoughts and feelings, has had temptations, has walked the shoes of man, and I think that is just one of God's fantastical ways to really let us go in deeper and understand. Like, if we want to understand who God is, the character of God, you know, he's given us Jesus, because that is a literal character, you know. So then when we talk about eternity, I think the best place to really start from the best place to start to pick apart this sort of question of eternity is when eternity came into, obviously, that box that you were saying, when eternity squeezed itself into what it is to be human, and that's Jesus Christ. I think that's if we start there, if we start for the whole reasoning behind Jesus Christ, then we will get to the whole eternity question. So just from that, why did we obviously need Jesus? Now, this is something Christians sort of have no problem answering. He's our savior, he's our friend, he's the person who took our sin and set us free. So why do we need him? Because we're sinners, because way back in creation there was the fall. So here's the question: was Eden designed to be eternal? Was the world designed to be eternal before the fall?
The Eden story is the pattern that doesn't end.
Okay.
If you're talking about a literal garden that has fences and a snake in it, well,
And a gate guarded by a flaming sword.
I'm sure we would have noticed by now if it's still there.
Yeah.
But the things it represents, the garden is just a manifestation of the things it describes.
Mm-hmm.
Those ideas aren't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So Eden is essentially this paradise, this sort of moment in time where man and God were one, were united and together in a relationship. So I believe, because God created us and because death didn't enter the world until the fall, that's sort of how I think souls sort of really take shape. The whole idea that souls cannot be killed. And I think, yes, physical bodies can be killed, but I don't believe like souls cannot be killed. It either goes to one of two eternities. So, and then there's the key reason why Jesus is so key, because Jesus is Jesus is the only way, the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through him. So that's the key. Jesus is the key to eternity. Okay. To the good eternity, I'll say, heaven. So that's sort of how I was approaching this in preparation for this talk, to really so Jesus was the epitome of eternity. He's the way to it. Okay, so let's start there. Let's start at the beginning of the path, Jesus Christ. Okay, so what are then the possibilities of sort of, because me and Josh were talking earlier and we were going to discuss sort of heaven and hell, because those are the only two opportunities, really, not opportunities, but only two ways you can go.
Unless you're Catholic.
Unless you're Catholic, you go to purgatory.
Which is like almost heaven.
Almost heaven, but not quite. It's like the bus stop to heaven. You're just waiting.
Pending.
Right. So I think. So I was gonna wrap this up with I think heaven last, really. So let's just discuss the other one, hell. Let's understand the reasoning behind it, and actually the necessity of hell. Why is hell necessary? And I know people listening to this will be like, ooh. And a lot of people who I've talked to about hell are like, nah, no good God would send people to hell. Nah, none of that, none of this. You know, it's all cruel, cruel, cruel. Isn't it bad enough on earth? Now, next thing you know, if people didn't hear what you had to say, they end up in this horrible, horrible place where not just evil is, but where evil gets destroyed. So, like... excuse me. How then does... I'm choking on a crumb. So yes, how then can we approach that in a way that Christ, I guess, approached it? It's probably the same way, but like, you know, we're called to, you know, be like Christ, but
Yeah.
with the technology that we have, with the setup that we have right now, on this podcast right now, how do we approach hell?
I think personally, to understand the reasoning for hell, you have to first understand the what you need to get into heaven. I think that's probably the most important thing, is to start with the criteria of getting to heaven. And straight off, we as Christians, we know that's perfection, which humanly speaking, that can't be reached. And I think the reason people have such a trouble believing in a God sending, inverted commas, good people to hell is because they don't truly understand pure goodness. And it was something I was thinking about, and that is that goodness, or the word good, is only relative to what is around you. So if we believe in a God, which we do, an eternal, almighty God, pure goodness, there's nothing at all impure about his goodness. So if you can imagine that God's goodness is pure, like what I do in my everyday life is relative to what's around me. So I mean, it's good that I don't kill people, because that's relative to people who murder. that is good. But my goodness my goodness is only relative to other people's evil, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how then can a God of pure goodness accept me of relative goodness? Is I think that, to me anyway, explains why I can in and of myself reach heaven. And I think that's then where obviously Christ comes into the picture for giving a pathway to heaven. But it also explains why those who do not believe in Christ and do not take the pathway that God gave, I think that's why there has to be a hell, and you can't ignore that.
That's the same way we have, you know, the whole justice system, I think, is what I look at whenever I'm talking about these sort of things, use it as an example. So we have the law, you know, the Ten Commandments, and, you know, just the teachings of the Bible, and you know, if you break the law, you get punished. And because God is the ultimate margin of goodness, there is no tolerance for evil. I don't think anybody in their right mind will tolerate evil. So definitely God won't, and so evil must be destroyed. So you sort of, we're criminals in a sense, because we've all fallen short of God's law. We're all have done something evil once or twice in our lives. That's we're criminals now. We're criminals, and then Jesus steps in and he says, like, we've been judged and we've been sentenced to death. So then the whole purpose of Jesus comes in and Jesus says, hang on, I will take the punishment, I will take the fine, so that this person may go free. And I will take the wrath of God. And we see that with the cross. So there's that, all right. There's that sort of, I think that sort of wraps up the whole idea of, as you say, you think of the criteria to get into heaven. So then when you talk about hell, it's just people who don't have that. I think it's a little bit, I think when I think of hell, I don't just think about, you know, bad people. I find hell to be a very, very sad truth. The truth is often sad, and it can be quite heartbreaking to discuss, and I think we do this very carefully in a sense of, you could look at it in one way of saying, oh, it's perfectly fine. I mean, obviously good, like, evil must be destroyed, but then there's a lot of personal attributes where people don't quite understand, like, what they're doing is wrong. They don't really know, like, and they begin to fear, they begin to be scared. I remember when I was younger, the reason why I started reading my Bible and stuff is because I was so scared that God would just, like, snap his fingers and it was like, Ben, you ran out of time. So I was like, uh-oh, better read my Bible, better pray some more, better be good. But then I was like, the more you read the Bible, you realize, well, actually, like, it's quite funny. Like, when I talk to people about Christianity, they're like, oh, they all think they're a bunch of stuck-up snobs. They think they're all perfect. No, literally, when you're a Christian, you realize how imperfect you are, and you realize the necessity it is to have a savior. Now, Josh, when we were talking about this earlier, you said you'd something to say about hell, and I'm really quite interested to see what you have to say about this.
Okay, so I am almost 100% certain my concept of hell is completely different to your concept of hell.
And this is exactly why it's interesting.
So, there isn't really much distinction between heaven and hell, in my opinion. That is right. I'm gonna borrow a few different ideas from a few different people. I did not prepare 3 weeks for this, like the last episode, so this is gonna be a bit off the cuff. So Jordan Peterson would say, if there is an absolute ideal, no matter what the absolute ideal is, he is also a judge because his very presence judges you because he's the ideal you look up to. And every part of you that isn't like that is like it's on fire. It's being judged just by his. He's not doing anything, right? But he's a judge. If you're say you're weightlifting, right? You're starting out weightlifting, and you're weight or something, and you see all these other guys in the gym, and they're like big muscles. They're like lift like 5 times as much as you or something. Or you see some Arnold Schwarzenegger. You see him lifting whatever I don't know how the weight lifted, but
A lot.
Obviously from that one small perspective, right?
Yeah.
You can see how Arnold Schwarzenegger is the ideal, but he's also the judge because he's the ideal. You're comparing yourself to him.
Yeah.
So that's the duality of Christ. He's a paradox because he's the ideal of forgiveness, but the ideal of forgiveness is a judge because he is an ideal of forgiveness, which is what makes Christ so interesting, in my opinion. What else? I'm just gonna speak.
Thank you, Josh. This is a podcast.
That's a good start.
If God is limitless without boundaries, okay, I'm going to read this thing I just wrote this morning that I was not expecting it to be on this podcast or anything. Right, this is about suffering. So on suffering is to the mind what pain is to the body. That is only but an indication of something. Suffering nor pain is bad in itself, only a byproduct of something else. So like someone who cannot feel pain, they are more likely to inflict on themselves serious harm. The same is the case for suffering. Likewise, the goal to remove suffering cannot be attained. For in this pursuit, suffering can only linger on, since it is but a symptom of something else. That is the belief in the identity of the self, separate from the infinite. Suffering revolves around the illusion of a separate self. The separate self can also exist in the illusion with the very idea that it is something to be removed, because you can only remove things that exist. Life is suffering, a misdiagnosis of the symptom as the disease. What is the root disease? The identification of the I as an object, something separate from the infinite, something that is apart from God. By the nature of identifying the self as separate from God is a very contradiction to God, and therefore to being itself. How can then the infinite, that is God, fail to encompass all things? That would imply that the infinite has boundaries, or has limitation. This manifests itself as the experience of hell, the experience of trying to be apart from something that is infinite. So hell only exists to the extent that people who don't assign themselves to the infinite exist. Suffering is the rejection of the now. And then I've got some sentences. We should be in the ever-existing present, always, as if there was no time, for time is only an illusion of change, and God is the Almighty One, infinite being himself, that is never changing. Live in the now that never passes. True peace, happiness, contentment only arises after the realization that suffering itself doesn't actually exist, but is a mere illusion of defiance. And then an example with this would be, if you wake up every day and when you brush your teeth in a rush, only to usher in the next minute when you finish brushing the teeth as the goal, in place of ushering the next minute in place of the now, all you're doing is perpetuating suffering, which is quite harsh. But
yeah,
that's what I thought this morning.
The key, something that stood out for me in that is how you said that people who don't, like, obviously the people who don't assign themselves to the infinite.
Yes,
I was quite profound. You need more than just like an earthly understanding to really fathom what's going to happen, what's going on. But I think ultimately this whole thing that you've said has quite a painful, like I think people who hear that are both encouraged but also troubled in the fact of, you know, what if somebody is suffering right now? What if somebody is just trying their hardest, trying their best, and they feel like their life is just to live in hell, and but they can't bring themselves to believe in some God that they barely hear anything about, who, as far as they are concerned, never really had any time for them. How do we sit here and talk about hell when people like that are sitting in their rooms right now, listening to like Juice World or something, being like depressed and just having a really, really rough time? How do we approach this idea of eternity delicately with people like that?
Well,
go ahead. I think that the very existence of your suffering is proof of a God, and give me a second just to explain that. In the sense that you have an innate, built-in desire for more in life. We always, even when we're happy, at best in this world, life's mediocre. Is something that my dad said to me recently, and that kind of stood out to me.
Depressing.
And depressing as a thought that is, as a Christian, that gives me hope that if this life's mediocre, then whatever's to come is going to be incredible. But when you're in suffering, you always want out. You always want a way out. And a lot of the time, sadly, from an earthly perspective, people can't see that way out. But that's what the Bible literally is, and this idea of eternity literally is. That is literally your way out of suffering. Like Josh was saying, you know, suffering in the presence of the Lord is absent. If you are in harmony in a relationship with the Lord, that is effectively your soul's suffering has been relieved. And though you can still suffer humanely, you can rest assured that regardless of what life throws at you humanly, that eternally your soul resides in the heavenly kingdoms with the Lord.
Can I just add to that an example? Me and Ben were talking in WhatsApp about something.
Yeah, the satisfaction thing.
I have no idea. I was talking about flames.
Okay.
I can't remember what. It'd probably be better if we find it, but it was something like, if God is fire or something like that, and we're getting burned by the fire, that would be akin to hell. But
yeah,
if we then become the fire, that is only an aid to us. If that makes sense. How can a fire be hurt by fire? Would be one way of putting it.
Reminds me of the sort of burning bush. You know, it's
okay.
That's that's the example I used, wasn't it?
Yeah, a plain bush that is on fire but is not burning. I see Christ in that. A plain man but on fire with, you know, the Spirit. And it's as obvious as the burning bush with his miracles and obviously with his death and resurrection. But Christians, we have that same fire within us. Flame is what you cauterize a wound. You know, it's painful, but it's ultimately one of the best things that you can do if you're bleeding out in that situation.
The same way he describes himself as the purifying fire.
Exactly.
All right, I found. So you were talking about eternity, and at the end you were like, "Do we ride or survive, or do we stay in our places and have faith? God will pass over is. End of sentence. I said, we do not ride, we do not survive, but we thrive. Like the burning bush, it was on fire but did not burn. If flame is met with even more flames, does the flame get burned? No, it grows.
It sort of reminds me, like, there's a metaphor that I heard. Jesus Christ was the sun, like the actual sun in the sky, and after Jesus' time, when it sets, you know, the moon rises in the night. This is the dark night. But how is the moon bright? It's the sun rays reflecting off it. We as Christians reflect that. It's the same sort of light, but we're not the sun. You know, we're, you know, material like the moon. We're just rock, but we're so special because of the sun. Now, you said something about satisfaction. How can I really be satisfied? And this, I think, was what really led me to really sort of study out about what heaven is. We had a conversation recently how basically I was saying the only thing that really makes me happy now is thinking about heaven. It's literally, it makes me like the happiest I've been, because in a coronavirus world at the minute, it's just depressing all the time. So satisfaction is, I talked about this with you as well, Josh, in that really long essay that I sent you one day about numbers and stuff. But satisfaction itself in the world, once you're satisfied with something, give it a week and you'll find another thing to try and be satisfied about. Give it a week and then you'll try and find another thing to be satisfied about. Like, I don't know, like, I'm a bit young, but like when I retire, I want to have like a ranch or something with horses. But like, when I've built that ranch and when I have those horses, when I've fed those horses, and when my grandchildren are out playing with those horses and some dogs and some chickens, what's the next project? Well, I was like, well, I'll probably have a workshop and do woodwork, or do a bit of smithing, or maybe like. But then when I'm done that, what am I going to do? What's happening? I was just like, oh, flip, just kill me already. I'm done with the planet. It's so satisfaction is very interesting when it comes to heaven, because I was like, right, we're designed to be adventurous and curious, you know. The first job that was ever made was Adam's job in naming the animals, exploring Eden, and you know, we are naturally curious and adventurous, and I 110% believe that we're still going to have those base foundational characteristics about all of us in heaven. So about this whole eternity, the question I rose was, will there be eternal satisfaction in heaven, or will it just be like earth, where when we're done with something we go on to the next thing, and that'll just be an eternal train? That will be just an eternal sort of love, because God created this world not for us to love him, but for him to love us. So with all of eternity, if he has this whole plan, will there be new things created, or will we just, in the classical sense, sit in a cloud with a harp? That's really boring in my opinion, but you know, satisfaction, I think, is whenever you really delve into that sort of psychology, I think that's the closest thing you can get to heaven on a human level, without obviously the help of a Bible. But you know, if you're talking about heaven and you have a Bible, that's really helpful.
Well,
but yeah, just speak off that.
Again, I think your concept of heaven is not as full as it could be. Like, I'll say one of these sentences again. If you wake up every day and when you brush your teeth in a rush, only to usher in the next minute in place of the now, you're doing it wrong. You're perpetuating suffering, to be precise. I mean, with that idea in my head, I had the best brushing of my teeth this morning I've ever had in my life, right? And it wasn't like it was any different than the other times I brushed my teeth. So what's changed?
That was in
the perception has changed.
Yeah.
Right? The orientation have changed, right? The way of being has changed, right? Hopefully I don't say right again, because I annoy myself when I do that.
Well, but just this way of being, or what's your attitude whenever you're satisfied with
what do you gain when you finish brushing your teeth?
Clean teeth.
And what do you gain with clean teeth? Like, you're brushing your teeth, they're gonna be clean, right? I said it again. But your teeth are gonna be clean.
Yes.
Why do they need to be clean now? Just
So they don't fall out.
Just chill out, you know.
Chill out, man.
Clean your
Don't
teeth
rush.
and enjoy life, because the most relieving things and the most daunting thing about life and the suffering life is that, as you said, no matter what goal you achieve, you can still be depressed. Be like, all right, my goal is to get this, whatever you said, like farm with steels or something.
Yes.
And then you get it and you're like, all right, now what? Okay. Like, even but you can also be depressed when you're just in some sort of cupboard of an apartment somewhere and you're depressed about yourself. I'm in a cupboard of an apartment, I don't even have a garden, my kitchen is shared or whatever. It's the same problem got to the by different means. And if I can have satisfaction in the very brushing of my teeth, I mean, as meaningless as brushing your teeth is, you can have satisfaction in life if you just look at it the right way.
I think I understand. Like, heaven is going to be that pure mindset of, in life, everything we do is to, as we were talking, like a finite end. So at some point I'm going to die. So I want to squeeze everything else I can in. And I think to an extent that's maybe why, even in the happiest times of our life, there's always more. I want more. It's the same with people with money. I always say you get a little bit of money, but then you want more. I think in heaven, that's kind of with what you're saying. It's like a perfect satisfaction, in that you like every need that you could ever have or want or think about is given, but in an eternal sense. So you don't have the pressure of time. I think time is one of the things as humans that's probably one of the most scary concepts, is that time for humans is finite, and that someday your clock runs out, and with whatever you believe in, for us it's heaven or hell, but other people believe that you just die in the dirt. Regardless of what you believe, life is over as we know it, but there's more. And I think heavenly terms, well, I can't wait. We were talking about it, as you said, and if I died today, though my family and all would be sad.
Hallelujah.
Exactly. And that's the assurance that I have in my eternity with Christ, that I'm not going to get bored in heaven. Sometimes when you overthink about it, and I've done it many a time, you're like, well, you know, there's only so many walks I can go on golden roads before I'm a bit bored. But boredom is, in a sense, a concept created by the human mind, and it's not of the infinite, because Christ was never bored, God was never bored, and never will be. And I believe in our eternal beings, when our souls are eternal, that we will feel the exact same.
Christ spending 40 days in the desert, you know, I was there for
I'd say you're hitting on something. So you are. But think about it. Our goal as Christians, our ideal, that is the judge of forgiveness, is Jesus. And as you said, he would never get bored. Surely, maybe. Speculation.
I believe he has been bored in his
maybe
in a human
but like
form.
not in the sense of, oh, I'm bored. I hate brushing my teeth. It's so boring. I do it every day. I hate it. I bet you he brushed his teeth the best way a man can brush his teeth. Right? And
Perfected teeth brushing.
Aim to brush your teeth just like Jesus.
In a joking
only
manner,
in this podcast. Only in this podcast we say things.
But
like
in the satire joke of that, there is
I'm being serious. I'm being deadly serious.
I actually do understand what you mean. Like, if you do everything in life with a mindset like you're saying of Christ, the way Christ would, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to get the bus the way Christ would get a bus. Brush my teeth the way Christ would brush his teeth.
Yeah, but like, if you put it that, you are correct. But I would say, if you're constantly like, oh crap, what if I'm not doing it like Jesus? It's gonna be torturous.
I do think this raises,
to say the least. But it has to be natural.
This raises a question. This raises a question though. If you do sort of be happy, I think this is what we're trying to get at. You know, be in
Be happy now.
Be happy now. Not well, yeah. But like, there's a question of, you could not be depressed. You could be the happiest person ever. You could love your life and stuff. And then the next thing you know, some tragedy happens. Like my dog died a few weeks ago. You know, best friend. That's rough.
Yeah.
You know, whole family in tears. Because it's like your best friend, right? You know, like for people who don't know God and have had such emotional connections and have been happy and have been doing good, as you say, brushing their teeth like Christ in the way that they know, as in being happy, doing things to the best of their ability. When tragedy hits, and this is suffering, how do we speak about, you know, oh, just be happy, or oh, you know, get on the bus like Christ get on the bus, you know, like how do we say these things to people who just want it to stop, who are begging just for a moment of silence, to be alone?
Well, in the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, suffering is not evil, but instead should be considered among the greatest of all goods. I'm glad I just have these random notes for me to pull
it's very good.
on short notice.
Elaborate on that though.
Suffering is not evil, but instead should be considered among the greatest of all goods. I am not completely familiar with Nietzsche, but from what I have recently discovered, basically he's a very smart man. I see him as a prophet, although he wasn't a Christian. He was a nihilist, and then he like had a bunch of stuff of reasonings why everything is meaningless and stuff, and he was a nihilist. But then he came out of that. He somehow overcame the nihilism, and he's the person who said God is dead, which a bunch of people quote, but he also said God is dead and the blood is on our hands and it can't be washed off. Okay, and he predicted what, quotation marks, God dying would mean in the future in the form of atheistic communism, fascism. So the idea of the state replacing God. He predicted that somehow. So from my understanding, he saw suffering as good because it gave you a chance to transcend the suffering. Is my understanding. Again, I'm not completely familiar with Nietzsche.
Yeah, I think we can find that in the Bible as well. I if I had it in front of me as a reference, I would, but I'm fairly sure it's Paul says that, like, we know that to live is Christ, to die is gain, but also Paul talks about suffering, and many times throughout the Bible, suffering is referred to as a blessing from God. Because a little bit like you're saying, when you go through suffering as a Christian, if we turn to God, we as you said, transcend the suffering, and it's like God talks about it as a refining fire. I think I can't actually perfectly remember the passage, but something along the lines of blessed is he who the Lord sees worthy of going through suffering. And I've also heard outside of the Bible people talking about God gives suffering to his strongest soldiers, so to speak, because God understands the pains of this world, but he wants to it's not that God's a bully and he throws stuff our way to force us to look to him, but that God loves us enough that he's just always wanting to, he just says look up, and sometimes he sends these things to us so that we always look up rather than looking out around the world.
Yeah, it's a father's love, a father's guidance.
And discipline.
That's
you said, which would be refining fires, I guess.
Yes.
And then the story of Job, he seemingly didn't do anything wrong, and then God took everything away, and then he was like, why? But then at the end, Job respected God more.
Yeah.
And is Job better before or after the suffering? Even though everything was taken away with him, I'd say after, because he respected God more.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
I don't know whether it's Paul or Peter that says this, but it's like at the end of one of their letters, they go, so after suffering a little while, you will have eternal glory and salvation. And it's like, it's really quite funny, I think, how they approached suffering. It's like, well, if you do it in the name of God, just keep going. You're just like, no. And the Christians are being fed to lions and crucified and getting stoned, and like, they're just like, look, you will suffer. Jesus suffered. Keep going. You will fulfill God's plan for you. And as I said to you the other day, Christians are immortal until God calls us home, after we've fulfilled the purpose that God has for us. And I think Christians look at that in a way of, oh, what can I do with the people around me? But sometimes it can be something so personal. Like, a Christian, I believe, could go through the entirety of life without talking to a single person, and God will still have a plan. It's for our own development, as well as for the people around us. As you say, being good is only when you're like, how do you compare yourself to being good? It's when, like, you obviously have bad people around you, and then you're picked out to be like a good person. This idea of, we have sort of nitpicked and picked and choose, going like good, bad, blah 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 blah. But it's a lot more easier than that, I think. It's just as you said at the very start, it's this sort of criteria, and it's only sort of one. Have you sinned?
Yeah.
Everyone has sinned. So stop thinking about God gonna do bad things to you and stuff. Like, you're already on the naughty list, essentially. You're already there. All right. When you're a Christian, you're aware of it. When you're a Christian, you don't go, oh, I'm on the nice now.
Yeah.
You're like, nah, I damn well deserve to be on that naughty list. And then we understand then that Jesus scored out your name and then wrote his name. And he's doing that for every single person. He wants to do that for every single person who has been born. And that's insane. And he would do it again if one of them, like, then there's that, the whole love of God idea. And love, I think, is how we get to eternal satisfaction. I think it was you that said it when we talked about this whole idea that eternity can only exist if it's inside love, and love can only exist if it's inside eternity, because love God.
Love is eternity.
Love is eternity, exactly. It's this recurring thing. And I think that is the summary. Like, we're not sitting here, right, and we're not telling listeners to be like aware of like evil things and not to be depressed, and if you're a Christian, suffer a little while and stuff. We're not sort of, we're not just rhyming off normal things that Christians hear pretty much 24/7. We're actually saying, well, hang on a minute, there's a little bit more depth to this. How can you develop yourself personally in understanding about these criteria, as you've said, and how can we help people see that they're on such a thing? I mean, surely an atheist can see evil, even though they believe that there is no epitome, because if it's all just from nothing, then everything is just opinion, and there's no real foundation to stand on at all. Whereas Christians have a moral foundation. Everyone has a moral foundation, and that points to the God of the Bible. Morality in itself is God, the ultimate epitome of goodness. And if there is that goodness, it cannot be anywhere near evil, or evil cannot be anywhere near it, so it has to go somewhere. The question is, are you smeared in that dirt? Are you covered in that dirt that only Jesus, the blood of Christ, can wash away from you? That's the question. That's the main question that we should be asking whenever we do talk about eternity, because we could rhyme off of all the things that what we think is going to happen in hell, all the things that we think is going to happen in heaven. As Christians, and we talked about this, we think it's just absolutely brilliant to think about heaven. We just love it so much. It's a way for us to sort of let go of the daily grind of life and just dream a bit about, how good would it be to just go there right now. That's like
how
something.
About, we are after an hour at the minute, so how about that? I'm gonna say, we can all say our last words, and then I feel like,
I was doing a wrap up thing.
Okay, but I do want to talk on, because there's stuff that has not been said, and there's stuff that I have said that you don't understand coming out my mouth. But like, I think I know how to start the next one. If you would like to join us for another one.
I'll just say to be continued.
Okay, well, I'm gonna give an example of just literally this morning of first world problems that other first world people could understand. I don't know why I'm holding So I was driving up here, long drive, and then I was on an unrestricted country road, and there was this person insisting on driving 30 miles an hour the entire way, but every time I went close to go around them, they blocked the middle of the road.
Yeah, they just swerved out.
Yes,
Standard on a country
it was
road.
actually quite dangerous, but we were only going 30 miles an hour, so I could brake.
They thought they were an F1.
Yeah, but I could reasonably get really annoyed about that, okay? But like the brushing of the teeth, man.
Josh, you're
Here
just,
we go
you're just
again.
vibing all through life. You're just a happy
just
man.
like the brushing of the teeth. I mean, like
You
the-
must brush your teeth
yeah.
3 times a day, yeah?
no,
You enjoy it that much?
no. Well, I'm not. Well, again, it'll be.
Besides the beard.
I wouldn't want to turn. I wouldn't want to turn brushing in the teeth as a vice. I want to usher in the next minute so I can brush my teeth more. But no. Anyway, as I was saying, just like the brushing of the teeth. I mean, I felt the call to be enraged, but it's still a choice.
Yeah, I would.
You can just
I'd agree
just
with that.
live the moment, man.
Mm.
Some guy's driving 30 miles an hour blocking you passing them. That's okay. That
Like
is
somebody
okay.
who gets angry really
That is
easily.
okay.
That's very challenging for me, but
Yeah, I don't know how
It's a
well
vibe.
I can cope in that, but
yeah.
I understand.
Would you like to say anything wrapping up?
Well, we've talked about a lot. I think the most important thing is just remembering the goodness of God and everything. And everything we've talked about today is important, as Ben said. But the most important thing is to remember Christ in everything that we've talked about, and the sacrifice that he made to get us to this place called eternity, which we've discussed. And I think that would be my final note, is to don't always look at eternity, but it's important, but look at Christ.
Leave a like.
Oh, yes, leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Sorry, I'm new to this business.
Follow on Spotify, downloading Spotify.
Yeah, all the links
and
down below.
Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
We're on everything, pretty much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.